Tonight I have a bunch of questions to ask, but the main one is diversity killing the Marvel Universe? Or comic books in general, for that matter. And welcome back to the heart of the stories we tell. I'm Rob the host, and this is another look deep into what makes a story, a theory on storytelling by a storyteller who believes that every story has merit. And tonight's episode is diversity in comic books, and this is far from the first time I've talked about it. Specifically, I reviewed the first new Superman, and I talked about Riri Williams twice. In fact, part of the reason for this video being my 52nd week of video is because of the fact that they were some of my most popular videos, talking about the idea of what exactly is diversity, and is it cool to be included in the comics or not. Let me just get this out of the way. I don't consider myself a feminist, I don't consider myself particularly socially active when it comes to social justice or the like, but I have to say, I think diversity rocks. So last week we talked about G.I. Joe and the fact that even back in the 80s it was a pretty diverse thing. And remember, it was based on a comic book as well. Back in the 90s we had Justice Leagues that, well, were trying to be diverse, although they kinda still ended up primarily white and male. We at least had different nationalities. Modern day reinterpretations of those try to do a little bit better of a job. If you look across, you can even see just how many different Supermen there are that are different races and creeds. And we, of course, have the gay Superman-Batman pairing, and we have multiple black Supermen, and we also have the female Superman, which, of course, is Supergirl. Never understand why that's not Superwoman, no matter what they say in the show. But of all of them, they all kinda give and take their own ways. They all have their own little spins on it, and that's cool. We've had these for years. None of these characters I'm showing you are anything new. Most of them came about 15 years ago, some of them 20 or 30. So why are we talking about it now? Why are we saying, is diversity bad for comics if I'm saying diversity's been at least my entire lifetime? Well, because we have this new character, and people say that she's just a social justice creation by Brian Michael Bendis. Of course, we all know who Iron Man is. We've seen the movies. But did you know that he's currently in a coma and is just an AI like his own computer program, and is helping Riri Williams by training her so that she can be Ironheart? By the way, she didn't even take his name Iron Man. She became Ironheart. And still people said, oh, they're forcing this down our throats. And she's cool. Now, I have a few questions of my own as to why they created a new character entirely instead of using James Rhodes' niece. And of course, there is a certain amount that this was pushed on us. The entirety of the way that both War Machine and Iron Man were taken out, along with the fact that we don't have the Iron Patriot character running around right now, is because they want to push this character. But that's not anything new. We've done this before. Remember some of those Supermen and Supergirl? They were all around when Superman died. But as I was prepping to do this video, this happened. Creators at Marvel stuck their foot in their mouth and said diversity was killing their line, and that's why their comic sales were down. Now yes, Marvel's comic sales are down, but they're down across the board. It's not like it's only the female Wolverine or Miss Marvel who's down. In fact, Miss Marvel is one of the ones that are up. Let's take a look at the fact that there are other Iron Man comics that are selling just as bad, because Victor Von Doom is the main character instead of Riri Williams. So, what does that mean? Does that mean that diversity isn't bad for comics? Does that mean that diversity is really bad for comics? Well, let's really take a look and unpack some stuff here. If diversity were bad, if that was the reason these comics weren't selling, then there'd be a whole bunch of comics that weren't selling. Let's remember the fact that through the ages we've seen quite a few Captain Americas, and we've seen quite a few Spider-Man, and you know what? Miles Morales' Spider-Man is selling as good, if not better. On the other fronts, we see TV shows like Luke Cage and The Night Nurse showing up in all the things being very popular. Where does that stand with diversity? How about our new Ghost Rider? Whereas comic might not be doing well, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has had nothing but good things to say about him. And again, two of the top-selling characters, Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel, and Miles Morales' Spider-Man, are all doing great. Lady Thor is the single best-selling comic this month. So, where does that leave things? Could it be that the problem isn't the readers or diversity, but in the basic concept of how Marvel is doing everything right now? Now, I could fill this entire video with nothing but bashing of Marvel. I mean, seriously, just being there like, oh man, I don't like this storyline, I don't like that storyline. Oh man, Civil War 2 was totally forced. But I'm not going to do that. What I just want to do is I want to go over, in general, what I think are their problems. One, event fatigue. There have been so many crossovers, and some of them just don't make sense together, and some of them lead into each other, and you're just sitting there and watching and going, okay, what next? They try to make jump-on points over and over again with issue ones, but those can just as easily be jump-off points. And then there's the price. I sit there and I go to look for a comic book, and I see that DC Comics are $2.99 or $3.99 for a double-sized issue, and I see that Marvel Comics are $4.99, $5.99. There was even a $9.99 one not too long ago. And I'm going to quickly slip in a little bit of a Patreon ad here, because I'm going to tell you how I set up my tiers. I wanted to know how much to charge per video, and I came up with the idea of basing it on comic books. $1.25 is what I used to pay, $2.99 is what I paid a little bit while later, and $5 is what I'm paying more or less now. Now I want you to take a look at those prices for a minute, because the $5 ones are what I'm saying on average I spend. And on average, I spend more for a Marvel comic than a DC. But to be fair, let's not just pick on Marvel here. Let's talk about what diversity means in DC as well. And the new Superman is a great example of this. Introduced in the new big event where the current Superman died and was replaced by the old Superman, we have this kid out in China who's developing Superman's powers. Now, the reason for it's a little complex, but at the end of the day, they have this whole series going, and it's very well written. In fact, it's probably one of the most fun comics I'm reading. Remember, China already had its own heroes. It had the Great Ten, and they show up from time to time, especially Argus General seems to be showing up more and more. But realistically, this is the first time that China's getting its own Justice League, and they get several characters that are just basic homages to others. We have the Freedom Fighters, we have the Batman, the Wonder Woman, and, of course, the Superman, the title character. And he doesn't act like Superman. In fact, he acts more like, I would say, Booster Gold. He's much more of a Year One Superman, or maybe a Smallville Superman, than anything else. And to be honest, the character is growing on me, as he grows himself. Now, the reason I'm using him as a counterexample here is because the numbers just came in from the last couple of months, the rebirth numbers, including this. And you know what title is starting to fall into the cancellation zone? This one. Is it because no one wants to read about a Chinese hero? Is it because people are just not sure what to pick up? I don't know. I have no explanation for why this or any of the titles are dropping, because I'll be honest, this title is one of my favorites. However, it's not alone. There are other titles that are being dropped too, and one of them is what I think is the DC's true example of exactly what Marvel's been doing. So, let me tell you about a character, and this takes a little bit of flashback. In high school, my two favorite characters were Booster Gold and Blue Beetle. In fact, my email address the first time I got off AOL was Blue and Gold for life. And, I mean, I don't expect many people to know those characters. They're not super famous, but they're two of my favorites. One half of the duo, Ted Kord Blue Beetle, was already a legacy character when I got to meet him. See, Ted Kord is Blue Beetle too, and I read most of his original run, and I've also read all of his Justice League appearances, and of course, when him and Booster teamed up. So when there was a one-shot that came out that had Blue Beetle as the main character, I was so ecstatic, because these guys just don't get as much coverage anymore. Back then I wasn't as into spoilers as I am now, so I didn't know what was going to happen. But the issue was so awesome, I was flipping through it like crazy. A character who hadn't gotten that much respect lately was given some really great scenes. He was awesome, and even all the way up to the end, he was the guy fighting the bad guy until... Yep, that just happened. They replaced one of my favorite characters with a new kid, and it was a diversity hire. They put in a Hispanic kid named Jaime Reyes, and I didn't give him a chance. You know why? Because my favorite character was killed. It's easy to blame the fact that he's diverse. Say, oh, maybe I'm just prejudiced against Mexican characters. But I'm not. The truth of the matter is, I'm prejudiced against characters that leave a bad taste in my mouth because they were replacing characters that I really liked. And it wouldn't have mattered if he was a white dude from Connecticut that I could totally relate to, or if he was someone else. He was still the character replacing Blue Beetle. Now, take a quick look here and notice something. Notice how many of these characters are people that are replacing other heroes. These characters are fighting uphill battles. Why? Because Riri Williams is replacing Tony Stark. Because Sam Wilson is replacing Steve Rogers. Because Azrael was replacing Batman. Because Miles Morales was replacing Spider-Man. You know what times those things do? Well, yeah, I mean, there's some prejudice. I'm not going to say there's not. There are people who are sitting there going, oh, I don't want a black person as Spider-Man. And there's some subconscious racism. I can't put my finger on it, but something about Miles is different than Peter. But for the most part, people are accepting when stories are good and not accepting when stories are bad. But even before you can get to the whether or not you're accepting the new Marvel story, you need to pick it up and you need to give it a shot. And sometimes that's hard. I really like Riri Williams. I really like the new Superman. I really like Miles Morales. But none of them are replacing my favorite character. Even now, having watched in cartoons and in other comics Jaime Reyes as Blue Beetle, I know he's a cool character, but there's something that just bugs me about him. And I know exactly what it is. It's not his race. It's the fact that Ted Kord died to give him his shot. That same feeling has tainted another character over at DC for me. Barry Allen's a cool Flash, he's the second Flash. But Wally West is the one that I grew up with. And the fact that he seems to be downplayed at every turn to keep Barry in the spotlight annoys me. And it's not anything against the character, it's not even the stories. The stories could be good or bad. It doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, I'm not giving them a fair shake because it just rubs me the wrong way. At which point it's easy to say it's not diversity that hurts comic books, it's forced diversity. But even that, I'm going to question. Because at the end of the day, does the why matter if the what is good? Miles Morales looks like he's one of the breakout stars of this diversity. Does it matter if Brian Michael Bendis sat down and said, man, I really need a black character. How do I write a black character? Or if he sat there and said, oh, I've got this great idea, and it's Miles, and he's this, and he's that, and he's related to this character, and he just happened to be black? No, I don't think it does. I don't think it matters one lick why you did it. It matters whether the story was good. We'll enjoy good comic book stories, and we won't enjoy bad ones. And we're going to give people chances, but the problem is that sometimes when you do something really bad, it leaves a bad taste in someone's mouth before they even get to find out if the story's good or not. Diversity itself is nothing new. Multiple comic book characters have had it. The entire Milestone universe is full of awesome characters that people love. But at the same time, when things change, it's hard to get into them. And Marvel has so many other things going on with it right now. Relaunching number ones all left and right, replacing iconic characters with people who aren't as iconic. It's hard to put your finger on just one thing and say this is what's messing up Marvel. In fact, that's part of the problem. There's so many things going into this and that you don't know. You just can't label one thing. There's too many things overall that could be contributing. Now, I've heard a lot of good things about Thor comics. I don't personally read them right now, but that's the new Jane Foster Thor. We just found out what made Thor unworthy, and I'm not too big of a fan of that reveal myself. Miss Marvel is selling like hotcakes, especially in trade paperbacks, and she's a Muslim teenage girl. And those are just two of the ones. The Ultimates. Ultimates 2 is full of diverse characters, and you know what? I love it. I wish that one was outselling every Avengers comic. But it's not. Why? I don't know. I'm not an expert in psychology or any of these fields. And with this brings up a question that has been asked over and over again on comic book message boards that I'm now going to ask to you. If the chicken came first or the egg, let me explain the question. Do we primarily see superheroes as white male because they were all written as white male, or do we write predominantly white male superheroes because that's what sells? It's a difficult question to answer because none of us have time machines. We can't watch both if characters were introduced way back when. But there's one other thing I want to touch on, and that's the X-Men. And I wanted to talk about this marriage from a few years ago, and that if you didn't understand the equality angle, maybe X-Men weren't for you. But then this happened while I was recording. The new X-Men Gold team is being put into middle of controversy. And yes, I said new because the gold and blue division is old. But the artist that drew it put in a whole bunch of things that are anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, including, the only part of it that I caught was, what's that next to the X? It's a Quran verse, and one that's, I guess, very hateful to people. And if you look closely here, it almost looks like Nightcrawler's batting poor Shadowcat in the face. And from her inception, remember, Shadowcat is Jewish. In fact, it's one of the most defining features she has in her backstory. Now, Marvel obviously didn't know anything about this, and Marvel didn't endorse this. This was merely an artist actually sneaking something in. By the way, the writer, Mark Guggenheim, is actually a Jewish person of descent, so it especially hit him hard. But as I was going to say with other things, you have to remember, the X-Men are the team that is the most out there when it comes to equal rights. They're out to protect the world that hates and fears them. They themselves are the analogy to every minority ever. It was used as against the civil rights movement, it was used for the gay movement, you name it. In fact, it's why I laugh so hard at the idea that Marvel's caving to social justice when they've always been that way. In fact, if you look back, DC, too, leans more liberal than conservative, and I don't think that's a problem. They're very progressive in general in comics, because, in general, creative people are. So do I think that having Amadeus Cho be the Hulk, or having X-23 be Wolverine is a problem? No. Now, some of them aren't my cup of tea for stories. I'm not reading the Amadeus Cho Hulk, although I've heard nothing bad about it. I'm not reading the new Thor comic, even though, again, it's one of the ones I hear almost all good things about. I'm not reading either Captain America. I'm not exactly hearing good things about those, but I'm just not interested in them right now. But at the same time, I'm reading X-23. She's one of my favorites. And I think Miles Morales is one of the best Spider-Mans out there right now. I also think the new Superman is one of the best DC books, and I love both Iron Man books right now. So, as far as this title's concerned, I think that diversity is done well. I do feel a little bad for Marvel, because all of this hit right at the same time. We have people complaining about diversity, we have people complaining about them mentioning the problem with diversity, we have the Quran verse, and of course, through all of this, we also have the fact that they turned Captain America into a Nazi. Okay, that one they totally brought on themselves. I think all in all, though, comic books are a dying medium, and it saddens me greatly to say that. I would love nothing more than for my niece and nephew, and some days my kids and grandkids, to read comic books. But more and more, I think that's going to be on a phone, on an app, and the Comixology type thing. And I do miss the feel of a comic book. And I still buy from my local shop because I want to support them. But for right now, I'm not exactly making mine Marvel. If you liked what you heard tonight and would like to see more of my ideas, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel and, of course, like and share it. Today marks the 1 year anniversary, 52nd week, of making videos, and I had originally hoped that we'd be at least 100 viewers by now, but we average in the 30s. I'm trying to build a community here. I'd like to start a back and forth, maybe even a video or two where I reference comments, but right now I'm not getting many. So please, join and let's all talk about what it means to be a fan of stories in general, as we take a walk through the heart of the stories we tell. Join me back here next week as we start a new leg in that journey.